how could fermented foods help shift us towards a more sustainable food system?
Wow. I would say home fermented foods, probably more so than, large scale commercial store bought things, definitely can. Mainly because microbes don't lie. So, like with a lot of in industrial farming practices, we can supposedly grow all kinds of produce out of season using kind of different methods and force to us what looks like ripe food, but we've only really fooled ourselves that you can't kind of trick the clock on microbes in the same way that like you as a gardener know that in winter you reset a lot of the diseases and the pests and stuff. That microbes are also a seasonal being in a way, and that if you're fermenting food yourself at home and you're using tomatoes bought from a supermarket in the middle of winter, nothing's going to happen, and you can't really see why, but that lack of activity is just reflective of the lack of microbes that are around at that point. So I do think that if people are fermenting food and eating more fermented foods as part of their yearly routine, it naturally promotes seasonal eating. It naturally promotes more natural farming practices.
Yeah, it doesn't really fit into the wants of a supermarket to have everything that you want all year round, and there's no like, oh well, there's no strawberries now, so you just got to suck it up and wait for it. You can have strawberries at Christmas.
And funnily enough, fermenting offers us that year-round availability. With certain practices that do preserve as well as unlock flavour. You're not only working with produce when it's natural and at its best, you're then preserving that so that you can have it all year round. There's this sort of weird mentality in supermarkets where it is that it has to be fresh looking, at least. Apples can be stored for a year, can't they?
Well, I fear that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, terrifying. But yeah, so there's that emphasis on things looking fresh and being, all wrapped in plastic and everything else. But really, it's a shift in our mentality that when something is at its best, and you can always tell because you can smell it. If you give something a sniff in a supermarket and there's no smell, there's going to be no flavour as well. So when something is seasonal and it's at its best and it's available, knowing what to do and how to preserve it, often through fermentation, makes that then available for you most of the year if you've had a big enough harvest.
I think as well the opportunity, because not everyone gardens, I think the opportunity that fermentation also lends itself to is that, especially on the preserving side, or even just preserving the flavours, or changing things, is that you can buy produce from your local market garden or farm when it is in peak season, when it's in that abundant phase, that you can then work with it.
Yeah, and often at its cheapest because it is so abundant. Like one of my favourite ferment recipes that we've done is using marrow or courgette when there's just too much of the stuff to make kind of a sauerkrauty, dill pickly type thing. And like that's incredible. People leaving, home growers in particular, leaving them out on their doorsteps with signs saying, please, for God's sake, take one.
Lobbing them over into the neighbour's garden.
Yeah, exactly. And then we make this delicious food out of it that then sits there and it lasts all winter. So yeah, and like I'm saying, you go to these, you could almost be cheeky if you go to like a farm shop or something and you see that they have a huge amount of these foods. You can say, if they're trying to shift it, haggle a little bit, get it a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, well, actually, they're just down the road from here is Watson and Pratt's, and they always have a whole shelf of produce that has gone just past like they're nice for selling, and so they're selling it for half price, sometimes just 20% of its original price, and there was so much food there. And it is seasonal, but it just might have a few more bruises or some more blemishes, or you might have a bit of brown on the cabbage that you just need to peel off a couple of layers. But I think one of the exciting things with fermentation is that I think it offers an actual solution when looking at reducing waste rather than just a trendy Instagram solution of reducing waste.
Yeah, definitely. There's an amazing person that I follow on Instagram who's called the Firm London, and she makes kimchi from everything. But her thing is
the Firm London.
I think so. Yeah. Her thing is all about making kimchi from waste. So it's always like collecting the trimmings of things and, you know, putting them in and like really elevating what it is by fermenting it.
Yeah, impressive. So in terms of looking at a sustainable food system, it kind of, for people that have a garden or can access things from a local greengrocer where it is lower price, there is a huge amount of opportunity in the home scale, which I think is quite exciting, rather than always thinking, hey, we need to change how farming works, all of these different things. There's actually, hey, here's a different way that we can work with our produce. And we're going to go kind of deep into fermentation today, because yesterday, when this comes out, the Fermentation Kitchen, your book comes out. We'll come into that in a second.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of things to talk about it, and I'm very excited, and I love the fact, thank you for using the apricots from the polytunnel here.
Yeah.
And my mum's...
Your mum's honey.
My mum's honey.
Well, her bee's honey.
Yeah, the Welsh Black honey bee.
Produce herself.
But I think one of the challenges that you've come up against is there's a lot of, not like so much stigma, but there's a lot of perception or judgment around the idea of fermented foods, especially in Britain. I feel like the relationship between British food cuisine and fermentation is a very confused one when a lot of Brits like cheese and yogurt and beers and stuff. But what do you think is kind of the biggest misconception that surrounds fermented food in British culture?
I think that it comes down to, like, all over the world you see cultures fall into two camps. One is like basically a phobia of germs, and the other is just a full embrace of all things fermented. I do think that for a long time we've particularly in restaurants, when I was chefing, you know, people were miso, soy sauce, mirin would be used as much as wines and, you know, yogurt, creme fraiche, cheeses, all these sort of, you push the bar out a little bit further when you're dealing with sauerkraut. You know, that was the extent of some people.
Oh yeah, it's like, oh, what's this unusual thing?
Yeah, old cabbage.
Tasty cabbage.
Damn right. But I do think that really, in a way, like the last maybe decade or so, and the advent of kimchi really taken over the world has like made it more mainstream. People have really realised just how it's not just sort of this fringe hippie thing anymore. It's actually kind of, you see it in-house kimchi on menus all over the place, and more people are interested in learning to make it themselves. And
there's a lot of kimchi rice around now.
Yeah. Well, it's an amazing way of, as we spoke about before, using up waste. So in kitchens, you normally save all your scraps and stuff to put into stock, but now you save some of it for fermenting and making kimchi and some of it for stock, and it's just another way of creating a completely different product.
But where do you think that phobia for germs has come from, with thinking, ooh, you know, is it safe? And I think, I don't know about you, but it must be frustrating feeling like, with a lot of things that you write about, having to caveat it with safety information of botulism and stuff and this and that. And I think that can be really difficult because it shows the lack of understanding. But when you go to other food cultures, I mean, it's a similar thing I think with the garden. Like, the way that I approach gardening is looking at polycultures and diversity, and polyculture not just in loads of different plants, but in terms of all of the different microbes. So there isn't that sterilized space where if something bad comes along, it can then kind of take over.
Definitely. And I mean, I always try and see the positives in everything. So having to explain these things to people and you know, precede things with caveats, it's kind of, if I can go on a bit of a tangent, it's kind of like the brothers who set up Le Gavroche, the restaurant, that they're a pair of French chefs that set up a fine dining, one of the best fine dining French restaurants in England, and called Le Gavroche. And their mentality was, this is great. England sucks at amazing French cuisine, so we're going to come in and teach them all how it's done, show them all how good it can be. And I feel like if I was in a country where everyone was fermenting, no one would pay any attention. But because I'm here in Britain, that does naturally have this sort of like germ-phobic approach, that people are intrigued by it. And like there is that kind of need to explain to people that actually, you know, disease and problems like botulism became prevalent with the advent of canning, which is something that we've done much more in the West as a preserving technique. So that's sort of what's led us down this germ-phobic view, because when something like canning isn't done properly with either the right temperature or the right level of acidity, we saw a huge rise in cases of botulism. Now, people from the outside who don't know about the history of that kind of thing, they don't really see a difference. They just see food in container must equal dangerous. And fermentation is completely different, because, you know, we use things like salt percentage and acidity, timing, temperature, you know, access to oxygen, or even motion. You know, these are all kind of governing principles that will stop things like that from becoming a problem until the right microbial population, be that, you know, lactic acid bacteria, acetic acid bacteria, or alcohol-producing yeasts, we let them take over first by creating the right conditions that suit them. And it's really simple to just let that happen, and then everything within the jar kind of forms its own little ecosystem that stops any nasty pathogens from becoming dominant enough to cause us a problem. Now, I do think, I think that the germ-phobic side of our culture and other cultures around the world comes from, I don't know if it comes from like the problems with canning and other things, but I think fundamentally it's like whether a culture embraces or whether it declares war.
Do you think it's a misunderstanding, potentially, because it's either a misunderstanding or a lost relationship with the living world? Because fermentation is a living food in a way, but in terms of like our ancestors and the way that we ate food, and if you compare studies of people that grow up on a farm versus grow up in a townhouse and their immune systems and stuff, that actually you need a bit of dirt or something to build that. Because I think the sterile environment, I think if you said the word bacteria to most people on the street and you measured a positive or negative response, I reckon it would lean on the negative side. And that's a really tricky thing to try and overcome, especially when, and I think part of the conversation around microbiome is like really helping to shift that, with actually there's such thing as good bacteria. But when they say like good bacteria, to me it automatically feels like most bacteria is then bad.
Yeah.
Like there's bacteria, but then there's some, you know.
Even those good bacteria, if they were in the wrong part of your body, will probably kill you.
Mm.
You know, it's only good in a particular way and with a particular understanding. And it's this sort of very black and white view of it, that there is good and there is bad. You know, in all things in life, everything's very, very black and white. But really, there's a massive grey area where even a microbes that within food that might not necessarily benefit you isn't necessarily damaging to you either. There's this grey area where a lot of people, I think, tend towards wanting a very simple answer and wanting, you know, it's like looking at our history and our culture, and people being a little germ-phobic, but still, you know, for the longest time we couldn't drink clean water. We'd have to ferment it into beer or cider or other things in order to make it safe, you know.
That's a great story.
And I think we're going to find that more and more with fermented foods in general, that that there's a huge amount of what we can do with them.
Yeah.
That particularly this book focuses on plant-based, a lot of plant-based. There's some dairy stuff in there as well, but because the nature of what you and I do is grown, so that there's vegetables, there's berries, there's fruits, there's fungi, there's grain, there's pulses and like legumes and stuff in there, that a lot of these things naturally build their own sort of chemical defences in place of being able to run away like an animal can, and through fermentation.
Like tannins, is that what you say?
Yeah, like tannins, but there's other things as well. Like there's sort of digestion inhibiting compounds in there that a plant might have all kinds of beneficial nutrients in it for us, but they don't want us eating them unless it's fruit, in which case they pack it full of sugar and make it as tasty as they can.
Like, eat me.
Yeah, but there's parts they don't want us to eat that fermentation offers us a microbial solution to making them more available. So I see it as, in the future, I hope we will see fermentation in the same way we used to see beer making as a necessity for making water safe. That obviously now we have the option for drinking spring water, which is lovely, but there's a lot of foods that we're starting to really understand with things like the gut microbiota and the gut brain axis, the gut skin axis, all these sort of interlocking things that actually fermenting foods could be a way of like really boosting the nutrition that already exists within them.
This episode is brought to you by the Growers Guild, which is a project that myself and today's guest and my colleague Sam Cooper have started. The idea is to create an online learning platform about everything to do with real food. And for those of you who are in full-time education or doing an apprenticeship, all courses are half price. Now, the first course is up on the Growers Guild, and it is in fact Sam's Salt Masterclass, the art of salt preserving, and he guides you through the incredible power of salt to preserve fresh seasonal ingredients. You're not only going to learn how to preserve fruit, vegetables, herbs, and even flowers with salt, but also how to unlock multiple health benefits and flavours that money can't buy. There is no other course quite like this one, and whether you're a gardener, foodie or a chef, there's a huge amount of things that you can learn from it. So if you're ready to get started today, head to theartofsalt.com. That is theartofsalt.com. So let's go into that. Let's go into, can you like lay out the benefits of fermented food? Give me I
can. I always caveat it with, I'm not a doctor. So, like, this is just stuff that I've picked up because I'm interested in reading research papers, but...
Well, I'll selfishly say, for me, the key benefit is flavour. And I don't think you need to be a doctor to talk about that.
No, I always
think it's a gateway drug for me into fermentation, flavour.
Definitely, yeah. I always hark on about the flavours that you can get. Put simply, microbes of all scale, from bacteria, yeast and mould, can produce enzymes that break down ingredients at a chemical level. Will turn proteins into peptides and amino acids. It can turn, all kinds of starches into short form sugars. And these are things that often our bodies can't do, which is why the gut microbiome is so important, because it's doing things internally that we can't. And in fact, it's a bit of a tangent, but there was a study done on rats where they managed to breed rats that were completely sterile, completely devoid of all microbiome.
Wow.
And they required 30% extra feed to survive. So that's, obviously rats are very different to us, but genetically quite similar. So it gives you some idea of how much a gut microbiome, a healthy gut microbiome, actually might be aiding us in our digestion. But there's a whole bunch of microbes that can't actually survive within us, and our stomach acid and bile and other things will kill them before they ever become a beneficial part of our ecosystem. However, we can use them to almost, and a lot of people don't like the term, but to almost pre-digest food for us in the form of fermentation in a jar by growing these things on, and we can taste that. That classic umami taste that you get in a lot of fermented foods like miso and soy sauce and shoyu is from our ability to detect the bonds between molecules, and that's what our sense of smell and our sense of taste is. And when you subject an ingredient like just a humble pea to Koji fermentation, for example, and you break it down and you release these very long, complex molecules, you break them into the smaller ones that we can taste, and we can't taste the long ones. The flavour, whilst also preserving the aromatic profile of these ingredients, which is normally denatured through heat and other things like that, you get the best of both worlds. And it's not even, to get really nerdy about it, when you produce similar flavours through cooking or, commercially produced things, you often get a very uniform molecule structure at the end of it. So all your sugars, for example, sugar tastes sweet, but it's a very one-dimensional sweetness. Whereas when you produce food this way, there's a layer of chaos that happens with the microbes where they're firing enzymes out all over the place that produces a complexity in the finished thing that you just don't get in other ways. You can't rush that process. So whether that is the sweetness produced in some things, or whether it's why we age wines and ciders, because once the microbial activity is done, that's then flushed with acids and enzymes that continue to bounce around long after the microbes are dormant or dead. And that aging process releases this huge range of compounds that we can detect all of them.
So you're saying that fermentation allows us to experience flavours that we can't buy or we can't get just from cooking that vegetable?
Yeah, we can't get it any other way.
And would you go as far to say that depending on how you've grown that food and what variety, that there is almost limitless potential with what flavours we can experience through fermented food? Like if you take two different, like the same beetroot but grown in different soils, or three different types of beetroot grown in the same soil, they all have their own kind of base flavour that if you roast them, you can tell the difference. But to me, I feel like it maybe opens a whole new world of experience to people.
Definitely. And those ingredients grown in different methods and different ways will come with their own set of microbes on them. And if you've ever tried, farmhouse cider or wild fermented wines,
quite a lot, thanks to my dad,
you'll know that year on year and different locations, they taste massively different. It can be the exact same grape or apple grown on the same tree year after year, and it's why we celebrate vintage in these things, because of the sheer impact that the microbial population, the native microbial population, has as it shifts and changes over the years depending on whatever conditions are benefiting it. So you could be making fermented beetroot or whatever else you wanted to year after year from the same patch in the same garden, and the vintage will change. You can really not just celebrate the seasonality of the ingredient, but of the actual batch you're making as you go along.
So it's kind of it is almost a reflection on the growing season in a way as well, based on like if there's a lot more light. It's cool. I think a lot of, again, this doesn't fit into the supermarket narrative of same. It's actually embracing the difference and embracing the experience. And one of the things that I'd love to know is do you remember, or was it a series of points that you went through that suddenly made you really passionate about fermentation? Because you started off in the kitchen. You started off as a kitchen porter, was it?
A long time
ago, pot wash, and then you got into like desserts and stuff. But what was it about fermentation that got you so hooked? Because I work with you, and I know how much and how passionate you are about fermentation. Obsessed. Thanks. That was what I was trying to say. You were obsessive fermenter, and it is beautiful to see. It's quite an art form.
Thank you.
Where did that start?
I think I gradually realised that fermentation lay behind every flavour that I loved in kitchens.
Wow.
Whether that was
chocolate.
I think, yeah. I mean, I said something to someone recently. I was like, well, we wouldn't have croissant. They were like, croissant are fermented. I was like, well, there's yeast produces carbon dioxide, which is like the leavening agent. So to some degree, yes. To some degree, no. Not as you'd imagine, but it's still a product of microbial activity.
Yeah.
I think the first line in this book, or one of the first lines in it, is I declare my first true love was cheese. And like,
I read that. Yeah. I was going to ask, what was your first true love? But I didn't want to put cheese.
And yeah, that the realization that this was fermented and that the wine that we were using to make sauces and stocks in the restaurant, that they were, it sounds obvious, but that they were fermented, and that creme fraiches and yogurts and sauerkraut and then later soy sauce and miso started appearing in everything. And
yeah.
From sweet as well. It's that sweet salty.
I once had a miso ice cream, I think.
Yeah. It's niche, but it's delicious. And that, this realization that fermentation lay behind everything like that. And I was starting to get more and more fascinated in, I suppose, like the condiments, the things that, the little bottles of things that chefs add into recipes.
Tinctures.
Yeah, that like push the profile of ingredients around and can really emphasize certain characteristics and diminish others. That these little magic potions almost always came back to fermentation. Also garum and Worcester sauce as well. Both products of fermentation, both incredible. So that realization occurred to me, but long after I'd done my first lot of fermenting was done with a good friend of mine, Ben Lavery, and he'd grown up making beer with his dad, and then we'd both come to university, and he carried on making beer and got me involved.
Say Ben Lavery?
Yeah.
Can't you spell like Levan out of that?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah.
My mind. Anyway.
And so I was making beer with him, and one of our first ones that we made, he's also really into typewriters, and he typed up the recipe
on a typewriter.
Gave it me framed. Wow. And I still have it. It's been like 19 years later. I still have it, and for me that was my first step into the world of fermentation. And then chefing, realising that fermentation lay behind so many different incredible flavours. And then starting to just like tap into that more, realising that you could make these things at home and reading books. And, back then it was before Noma's Guide had come out. It was before Koji Alchemy, or these, incredible books had come out. The only books I could really find on it were basically sauerkraut and pickles,
Yeah.
So it was kind of going in blind and finding people that were doing similar stuff, talking to chefs I work with from all over the world, and learning to make sauerkraut from a German chef who was amazing and also taught me the best Stollen recipe that I know.
I've tried it. It's amazing.
It's good. Sourdough Stollen.
Fermented.
Quite, yeah. That sort of led me in, and then I just started experimenting. I already had sort of a framework for how flavour worked in my head from chefing, and then applying that kind of knowledge and experimentation, and just sort of going, right, well, I know how to make sauerkraut, so what happens if I apply that technique to all ingredients that I possibly can, and working in ways that you think, okay, salt and fruit don't sound like they go together. It sounds disgusting. But when you do it and you have the mindset, the right mindset, when you bite into, you wouldn't want to eat a whole bit of fruit like this, but if you've, lacto fermented a plum, for example, and you take a little bite of it, if you have the mindset of olive more so than the mindset of plum, you've shifted the way of thinking, and like you're ready to accept the flavour you're about to try as not being some beautiful fruity whatever, but actually a really satiating salty version of a plum that you can use in all kinds of recipes, putting that in a sausage casserole is absolutely amazing. The fruitiness really emphasises that kind of like, in the same way you'd put like an applesauce in a pork roll or something like that, that it takes just a little shift in mentality to make you brave enough to try it to begin with. And then when you do try it, and you can start fine-tuning. And that's how I kind of got into it, and that's how I ended up with not just a kitchen full of jars, but also an office that's also full of jars of stuff that is just experimental. And then working more and more with people, and then leaving the kitchen and working with you. That was when I got my hands on probably the best produce that I ever have.
Well, you didn't have to say that today. That's only contracted for other interviews.
Shut up. But it's true. Like, it's never been more seasonal. Even working with some really good producers, it's never been more seasonal and better for fermenting these things.
How has that changed your perspective or outlook when it comes to fermentation since working with the land? Like, is there something that you weren't quite expecting, or new doors of opportunities that have come from that?
I think the realization that the microbial world is dominant everywhere. I think for me it was more, obviously I'd been to visit producers when I was chefing. I went to farms, met people, put in orders, had things arrive, but there was always that slight disconnection from, like, I wasn't picking it. I wasn't there for the harvest and then following it right the way through. It would often just be a place I visited, and then it would arrive in my kitchen and you'd get to work. And if you were fermenting, you knew the process and that was it. But working with you, the realization of things like the rhizosphere with plants and the soil health, and that actually it's way back when it's lichens and various microbial symbiosis that are even releasing nutrients from solid rock that's then being passed through soils and waterways and being made bioavailable for plants, and the diseases that plants can suffer are often when microbial populations are knocked out of whack, and what was actually a beneficial form of symbiosis has now become a disease and a problem, and that when you recorrect that it readjusts itself. And the realization that just how much these things aren't just in food and in gut microbiome but everywhere, that's, I think, one of my biggest takeaways.
I remember it was kind of in the early days when we started working together, and you kind of slightly blew my mind because you picked a blueberry or something and then you rubbed it and it went all shiny. And you're like, that was the microbial layer on the outside. Or
because they produce their own waxy layer, but that pearly white are the wild yeasts that are they're just basically waiting to have access to the sugars inside.
Oh, it's brilliant. What inspires you, or what is your goal behind writing this book? Because you have gone deep into fermentation. You've learnt a lot. There's so many other things I want to talk about, and
Sorry.
because I love it. But I think it'll be really interesting to know what was your intentions behind this book, because through your Instagram success, and then suddenly, technically you are Instagram's most famous fermenter. Technically.
Strange title.
Which is a strange title, but niche is cool. What did you want to get from this book? What did you want the reader to get?
I want people to realise that it's perfectly natural, that it's a very easy process, but that there's also incredible depth. Like, it might be like you think of food as a niche within books, and then within that, fermentation is even more of a niche. It's one hell of a niche.
And there's so many niches within it.
I don't think from the outside you quite realise just how deep the rabbit hole goes, And I kind of wanted to show that in this book. I wanted to give people more than just a set of recipes, but also know the how and the why behind certain practices and techniques, so that by the time they finish reading the book, they don't actually need it anymore. They can actually make their own recipes up. They can ferment their own things, safe in the knowledge of where the boundaries lie and what makes certain practices safe, and also become familiar with the microbes responsible. You kind of know that each one needs a different kind of condition to nurture, and it's unlike cooking. It's more similar to shepherding a flock or farming or growing your own veg. It's a nurturing process that ends up nurturing us quite sufficiently as well.
That is such a different approach to working with food, isn't it? Because of it, fermentation being a living food, you've got all the microbes as the livestock, kind of working hard.
Yeah, definitely. So that's sort of my approach, was that wanting to really give people just an absolute Bible of fermentation, and to also include, it was a bit of back and forth with the publishers over, they wanted to give people recipes on how to use the food once they'd made it, but I didn't want to sacrifice space for the sheer breadth of techniques that could go into it, because I thought if I was buying a book on fermentation and a third or a half of it was actually just recipes on how to use those things, I'd be a bit miffed. So our way around it was to include, there's a few spreads on how flavour works, specifically, or flavour, texture and aroma with ferments, and then how you can weave those into not just new recipes, but how you can weave those into your kind of family favourites as well, and like things you make every week. But then also every major fermentation technique is accompanied with a kind of a cooking with ferments section, where you have these recipe ideas, you have pairing suggestions, you have ways in which things work. Certain things might be amazing as a reduction, other things are incredible to use a byproduct of to pickle things with, and it's just how it all weaves in together. So it's a more passive way of introducing those ideas and suggestions throughout the whole book.
What really shines out to me is that you are one of the most creative people I know, and that shows with the way that you take these techniques and you look at, like you were saying before, with the sauerkraut, and you're thinking, how can I apply the same technique to other ingredients? But I remember we were at a local cafe and you turned up with your rice amazake or something. Do you want to just mention?
Well remembered.
Yeah. Do you want to mention what like just showing the you're almost an artist of flavour in a way.
Oh, thank you. It's funnily enough, I've just written a bit about that in my latest
on your Substack.
Talking a bit about my background actually training in art. The amazake, that was hilarious. There's actually a recipe.
You got some funny looks. To what?
From the staff.
It was so tasty.
They were just like, we'll just leave you. You could just do your thing.
That's what I have to do as well.
Yeah. Normally you benefit from it.
Oh yeah. That's why I leave you to it.
That was a Koji ferment that I specifically wanted to test its pairing with coffee, and I had tested it at home, but I don't have the means to make espresso, so I brought some basically in a little pot in my pocket into a local cafe and asked for an espresso.
Imagine you got stopped for a stop and search on the street. You're like,
what's that? Smell it. It smells amazing. I wanted to try it, and it was amazing. So I ended up taking a photo and putting that recipe in the book as well.
Now, I know you won't bring this up, but your book has already started entering people's homes. And I wanted you to share a little bit of the feedback that you've got from one of your greatest inspirations, Haruko.
Yeah.
Because I felt that was really special, and I just want you to be able to share it.
Yeah, well, that Haruko Uchi Shiba, who founder and owner of the Koji Fermentarian as her company, she's probably the person who took me deepest down into the world of Koji.
Even into your pocket.
Yeah.
With pocket
sleeping next to it. I slept with it in my pillow before. The way is to keep it warm. I'd dabbled with Koji, I'd say quite considerably, but from a surface level, with reading things like Koji Alchemy and Noma's Guide, and that kind of a much more Western interpretation of Koji and the experimental side of it. But she really taught me I'd say the authentic Japanese, 1,000-year-old, they've been fermenting with Koji since the 8th century in that country, quite often in single family businesses that are still going. So she guided me through that over a year ago, deeper than I'd ever been. So she makes appearances in this book as well. I regularly reference her and her lovely dogs. And I knew that I wanted to, in the mould chapter, go into quite considerable detail about Koji, about Aspergillus, and I wanted to do a service to Japan and her teachings. So when the book eventually came out, I sent her an advance copy and held my breath. I really wanted to do it well.
Yeah.
Probably the most nervous I've been. I don't care.
Like, out of everyone in the whole world, do you think you were the most nervous about her reaction?
100%.
Because it's out of that respect in a way for
definitely
the craft.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I'd say I was nervous about it. I'd say it mattered the most to me. I wanted to do.
Very stoic of you.
Well, I don't tend to get nervous from
No.
Yeah. And yeah,
What did she say?
She can't remember the exact wording. All I know, she said that regarding Koji, for which one of the chapters is, so it's not the whole book. She said it was the best Koji book written in the English language by far, which means a huge amount, and means that I listened well in her in her workshops.
That to me is just incredible, because Koji is a niche within a niche, but in terms of, I think that, because I sometimes struggle to know how to put words together, but I think that is testament that your obsession is a very healthy obsession because it brings results. And I think the thing that I also respect about her, I've never met her, I've heard a lot about Haruko, obviously.
She wants to come here at some point.
But I wanted you to mention about that relationship there, because you had that very creative mind. You're looking at Koji, you're learning these techniques, and then you're thinking, how can I almost like work with it, adapt it, build on top of it, integrate other things.
Yeah.
Whereas she has a very different,
very traditional.
Like, what is that difference? And is she all right with you taking these very traditional methods and then throwing all of these wonderful ideas at it?
Well, she actually said her reason for agreeing to teach me what she knows was because she knew her natural inclination is tradition and to stick with tradition, but she's very open to innovation as well, and she knew that I would take what I'd learnt and attempt to innovate and to explore and to really push the boundaries of these things. And there was a mutual understanding that I was not willing to really do that without a thorough understanding and respect for the culture and the history for which it comes from, which I try and do with anything that I've learned from, like Kimchi in Korea, and worked with people understanding that as well. To me, that step is very important, to have that foundation before you go ahead and start innovating and playing and getting, doing some more fun stuff as well. And she got that. She totally understood that and said it was one of the reasons for teaching me, was because she wanted to give me that foundation so that I could start adapting and playing.
Because she wouldn't do that, would she?
No, she does a little bit.
Does she? Yeah.
I'm not sure how much she'd tell people that. She does a little bit. She makes some amazing, absolutely incredible tasting things. But yeah, that for me was very important. And it's important throughout all food from all cuisines that you have to do it in a respectful way. And I can't remember what your original question was now, how much of a tangent we've gone off on.
No, it was more just that like difference of, I kind of see like it's like the master and the student kind of thing, but for that support, and then you go out and try these things, and then for her to give you that feedback afterwards is quite a special thing. And I'm like, would you say, because there's all sorts of different styles of fermentation right around the world, would you say that Japanese fermentations or ferments are of your like greatest inspiration that you work the most with, if you had to fine tune down to a particular culture? Or
I think in the world of koji, absolutely. Now, Aspergillus, which is the mold responsible for koji fermentation, does crop up in other.
And koji is where would you find that? Like the use of koji. What does that bring us? What foods, common foods, might people know?
Koji brings all sorts of stuff from like sake, which is like a Japanese alcoholic drink, mirin, miso, soy sauce, shoyu. We
all know how nice soy sauce is, so
yeah, Shio-koji, which I think a lot of chefs know about Shio-koji, or they call it liquid amino sometimes.
Oh, okay.
Or liquid umami.
Nice.
Which pretty much is. It's like in Japan, it's the king of condiments, basically.
Is it like their version of MSG in a way?
Pretty much, yeah. But as opposed to MSG, which is, monosodium glutamate that comes in a powder that you then add into things that kind of need a bit of help. With Shio-koji, it's this sort of liquid enzymes and salt that's a byproduct of koji and rice. Well, not really. It's you can tailor the koji and rice into it, that you then apply to meat or vegetables or whatever else you're kind of tenderizing and macerating and getting ready to cook with. You apply a little bit of it to it, give it a bit of time, and then you cook with it. And the enzymes have just like broken it down, it's seeped in, the salt carries it through, so it can make anything that you have applied it to taste more like that thing than you've ever experienced before, without actually imparting any flavour of rice or koji to the thing. That's why it's considered so good, because
so it really is a bit like their version of MSG in a way.
Sort of, yeah. But unlike MSG, that is a very one-dimensional flavour that you're adding into something, this in a way unlocks the sheer depth of flavour that already is within the, whatever it is you're treating to it.
Now, one of the things that actually entertains me quite a bit, and you'll tell me often when you get this kind of comments, right? You do this amazing fermentation as a reel, and then you cook with it. And people are like, oh no, you've destroyed all of the microbes.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about that?
If you're fermenting purely for the probiotics, then knock it out, go for it. Have fun, and don't cook with it. But it's one aspect of an incredibly complex and interesting process, and that quite often one of the reasons why fermented foods taste so good is not because of the microbes, it's because of the effects of the microbes, which are now long gone. So, if you have broken down these various foods into interesting things and you neutralise certain toxins and what have you, and then you cook with it, it tastes even better. It can be a stepping stone to something else. It doesn't have to be just, make something microbial and then eat it.
Well, you could say, okay, here's some raw sourdough starter then.
Well, quite, yeah. Or there's all sorts of... Yeah. But, yeah, that's my general approach, is that I'm fermenting for a myriad of reasons. And sometimes it will be for, probiotic qualities or something. If that's the case, it's probably normally kimchi or sauerkraut. And I'll just stick it in a sandwich with other things, or like a burger or something like that, where it's like crunchy, raw, lovely, done. Whereas quite often, adding adding things like soy sauce or adding a splash of wine into food. People don't think of that as the same. You don't get shouted at for that.
No.
Well, you do by wine lovers. They're like, why are you using beautiful wine in food? And people just like to shout at me, basically.
That's what makes the world go round, you know. But I think something that is quite interesting, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it's either a European or British thing or both, but this thing called garum, which I had no idea existed. Could you just give a very brief lowdown of what garum is, where it's from, what it offers, and what potential do you think that might have in the future? Because I feel like it's really tasty and it could catch on, and I think it deserves to catch on.
Yeah, garum's interesting because it's a fermented fish sauce. So you layer, I think classically anchovies with salt in a fermentation vessel. You just layer them up and up and up and up. It's quite a high salt content, so it is an equivalent to like a soy sauce or a shoyu. It originally is documented from the Romans, garum, and back then they didn't actually use salt in their food to season. They would only use garum, which is why it was so popular.
Wow.
But it's also a very smelly process. So it's not in my book because you can't have people making it at home. They'll stick their entire neighbourhoods out. And in fact, the Romans passed laws that meant garum had to be made a certain distance away from settlements. It itself comes from the ancient Greeks, and they used to have gyros, which was their version of it. And over here we have Worcester sauce, which is sort of originally our adapted version of it as well.
No way.
So yeah, it's kind of moved through Europe and done different interesting things, but it is fundamentally a fermented briny fish sauce that you use in small amounts.
Can you make like is that a way of making a plant-based garum?
Yeah. Oh, actually, one of those is in the book.
Is it?
There's a mushroom garum in there. So
is that less smelly? Is that suitable for your neighbourhood?
Yes. Although I've made a lion's mane one, which holy hell does that smell of lion's mane? It's so strong, but not in an unpleasant way. One of the things that's interesting about garum and gyros is that it's actually a form of autolysis. It's a form of self-digestion. So we have our gut microbiome. When the fish dies, the microbiome and the enzymes that are produced there is what breaks the fish down.
I see.
So it is a form of, in a way, self-digestion. So you apply enough salt to keep the pathogens out and from causing problems, but the fish breaks itself down into the finished condiment, into garum. Now, things like mushrooms, which is what the garum is made out of in there, don't come with that same set of enzymes to self-digest. So what I've done is substitute that with the enzymes produced from koji and mix that in instead. So in a way, it's a fungus on fungus form of garum.
So you're just bringing in that other element. That's a beautiful, your porcini garum. You're bringing in another element that replaces the role of the fish's stomach.
Yeah, in a way, you have to provide it with the enzymes that aren't naturally part of it. And it's the same, funnily enough, it's the same kind of process to how yeast extract and Marmite and Vegemite is made. I think Vegemite's made the same way. That's also a form of autolysis where we produce a huge amount of yeasts and then we heat them up to the point where we rupture the cells, and then it's the enzymes that were inside the cells that then start acting on that body of liquid and breaking everything down and releasing that umami flavour. So yeah, it crops up across the world in places you don't expect it to.
And one of the foundational ingredients of a lot of fermentation is salt.
Yeah.
And is that just any salt? Does it matter what kind of salt? Because there's lots of different salts.
Yeah, so I would stay away from table salt. Table salt needs to be banished to the hell it came from. It's full of anti-caking agents and other things that have a really detrimental impact on
Or microbes, is it?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. As does iodine. So a lot of salts come fortified with iodine, and that's for thyroid health in us, but it is also detrimental. So the best ones you can go for are natural, whether that's sea salt or rock salt, which includes pink Himalayan, and it includes kosher. Kosher is, to my knowledge, just a form of, I think it's a form of rock salt. It just is used for Jewish koshering. Those are your main ones, and within that, there's the consideration to make whether you want a quick dissolving rate or a fast or a slow dissolving rate, which is really nerdy stuff to get into.
Let's do it.
But how fast? If the salt is there to offer protection against pathogens, like which slows down things like botulism whilst other microbes take over, then you'd either want it to dissolve very, very quickly. For example, if you're adding it into water and then using that brine to ferment within, or you want it to happen very slowly. So if you're making a boshi, or if you're making, lacto-fermented tomatoes, or something that's a very juicy ingredient that produces its own brine, adding in rock salt means the dissolving rate is slower, so it draws moisture out of these things slower and promotes a really satisfying texture. If you were to draw moisture out too quickly, you'd rupture cells and cause a mushy texture. But by doing it slowly, you can turn a plum into almost a kind of a very pliable, fleshy kind of texture that's really nice. So there's lots of little considerations to make. You can also use like flavoured salt. So smoked salt is a lovely way of adding smoky flavours.
Have you done any fermentation with smoked salt?
Oh yeah, all sorts of stuff. In fermented, a lacto-fermented hot sauce.
Oh wow!
With smoked salt is divine. Adding it in, it might sound weird, but adding it into fruity things is lovely if your plan is to then use those fruits in savoury cooking. It's a wonderful dimension to add, and actually broaches the topic of aromatics and any way in which you can add extra and additional aromatics into ferments. Because once everything's in the jar or whatever you're fermenting in, and you've subjected it to that condition with the action of acids and enzymes produced by the microbes, you're now dealing with probably the most potent form of infusion going. So if you've added even a small amount of a smoked salt in there, or some herbs or what have you, or like lemon rind or something, the oils and the aromatic qualities are going to just permeate through everything so much more than just if you mix them together and let them infuse overnight or something, because enzymes are carrying these things together.
Wow. So the thing that I remember, because we were talking about salt and you've mentioned salt and fruit, the thing that really stands out to me as a memory was when we were doing that kitchen garden fermentation course, and you got some berries and strawberries and stuff, and you were putting salt on it. I was like, what is this guy doing? And it blew my mind, because what I've learned from fermentation is just, as I mentioned before, that sheer breadth of flavour. And I think that journey-wise, I can just imagine my whole life just always having a constant new source of flavours, especially when I'm trying to grow new things in the garden. And like I've just ordered some Saskatoons, for example, and that'll be interesting how that goes. Or looking at the pheasant berry or Himalayan honeysuckle, which creates that like burnt caramel flavour, and then playing around with that with the salt. And if you could maybe have that salted it's so exciting.
There's definitely a symbiosis where you're like, try this new plant.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, amazing. Have a little play. Try this new ferment.
Yeah. Is there anything in particular, or some like recipes in particular, when writing this book that stands out in terms of that like reaction of, I really wasn't expecting that, or in any of your fermentations where you've actually almost at a loss for words because you were stumped with how it turned out?
I mean, there's the easy answer, but I want to try and find something
You can
else.
do the easy answer to give you some time.
So the easy answer for me would be amazake, which is a koji, Japanese koji ferment that is purely rice that's had a specific mould grown on it, and then mixed with some more cooked rice and a little bit of water, and kept like you would yogurt. You keep it warm for about 12 hours. And what goes from... for me, it's like rice isn't something that we can like fully taste because we don't have the taste buds for starches, unlike mice and rodents. They can taste these things. So to be able to taste what a mould does to a single ingredient that we can't actually normally properly taste, and what that unlocks, you have the smell of honeysuckle and jasmine coming from rice. You have this incredible sweetness that, as we said before, isn't just sort of a one-dimensional sweetness like sugar. It's this beautiful array of different length sugar molecules ranging from almost complete starches right the way down to refined sugar, basically. And this sort of combination of things, and the whole thing basically liquidizes. That's just how strong these enzymes are. It can take the structure of a grain of rice and turn it into a puddle of liquid, which it does, incidentally, if you ever accidentally, trying to put it in bread dough or something like that, you can reduce that to liquid as well, as it breaks down the gluten. That for me was this like real eye-opener. Was like, how the hell can a microbe be so powerful that in 48 hours you go from a cooked grain of rice to this beautiful, fragrant, sugary, sweet liquid that you now have and can use in all kinds of other things as well. That was amazing. I'd never experienced something that simple and that powerful.
I love that your easy answer is amazake. That's brilliant. Could you apply, I don't know how it would work, could you apply the same thing, because I'm just thinking about starches, to like a potato or something?
Yeah, it'll liquefy a potato as well.
But could we try it and see what that tastes like?
Yeah.
Try the sugars of a potato.
Yeah, well in there there's applying it to root vegetables.
Right.
And making almost sort of a plant-based version of charcuterie.
Oh wow! Yeah.
You smoke and you slightly pickle and then salt cooked beetroots and carrots and parsnips, and then grow koji on them and let them kind of age almost like cured meats. So that's one amazing way of doing it. I'm trying to think of other. I think it's fair to say that in all fermentation there is this sort of degree of dispelling your expectations, that because it all happens within a closed environment within a jar, and then when you crack it open, unlike cooking where you can smell the changes happening, you can see the visual cues, you can try a little bit and taste as it's going. In fermentation, because most of it happens at a scale we can't see or hear, and it's locked away, that when you open that jar or that container and you get that initial smell, there is a degree of like you can't know beforehand what chemical changes and microbial activity has been happening. It removes your expectations, and it is new and it is fresh. And like I was saying, with the vintage of things and the different native populations of wild microbes, you never quite know what you're in for, even if it's something you've made 1,000 times before. And there is a magic in that is on par with, trying amazake and having that incredible experience that you get from every single batch of stuff you make. And I don't think that'll ever get old. I think that's...
No, how could it? And it's fun because I can, like with the rose hips, I gave those to you, and I think you said that when you opened the jar that they smelled like pineapple.
Pineapple
Something?
and butterscotch, yeah.
Roses.
Yeah, it's incredible. Absolutely. And next time it might be something else. Or if we try a different variety of rosehip, it's all to do with what's built in and how it's been subjected.
I love that. What do you think, like, if you, because of your vast knowledge of fermentation, and I want to see, like, where is that going to go in the future? But is there a particular style of fermentation or fermented food that you feel is unfairly kind of underrated?
A particular style that's underrated?
Either style or even a fermented food.
I think lacto.
I
think that...
Why?
It's seen as very, very simple. It's just adding a certain amount of salt to a certain ingredient. I like doing them individually and then giving it time. And I think a lot of people, they measure the worth of something depending on how complicated it looks. It's like people walk to an art gallery and they're like, I could paint that, It's like, I could ferment that. Like, yeah, you could.
So do it.
So go ahead and do it, And,
it's true.
like lacto.
Go on then, mate.
Yeah, quite.
On your bike.
Yeah, it's basically what this book's saying. But like lacto fermentation is an absolute powerhouse of flavour, despite how simple it is, and it's amazing what you can unlock in things. It's so elegant as a process, and it does give us flavours ranging from kimchi to yogurt and cheese and everything in between, whether it's sauerkraut or, lacto plums. It's also part of the facilitator action in a lot of koji fermentation.
Okay.
So a lot of koji fermentation, you're using the enzymes produced by Aspergillus and then handing that over to another microbe.
Right.
Whether that's, with sake, that will be handing it over to yeasts that then produce alcohol. In miso, a lot of the time you're hybridizing with lactic acid bacteria to produce just a nice little bit of fruity tang in there and to do other things and to ferment it that way. In the garums, they also sour because of lactic acid bacteria. So it has a part in so many other things that we don't even notice, as well as being a fundamental part of classic foods like cheeses and yogurts and kimchi. But also when you bring it out in isolation and you just apply it to tomatoes, you're just doing lacto-fermented tomatoes.
You inspired my dad. You've inspired him a lot with different ferments and stuff, but it just reminds me that I think it was last year, because he's been doing it for a while now, he started doing lacto-fermented cherry tomatoes.
Oh, yeah.
And so every time I'd go and visit my parents, he'd be like, oh, try this. And he's like, close your mouth. And then close your eyes. So then he pops in like as a tomato, but then you like bite into it and it's like this amazing like fizzy like flavour complex, and then having that like on some sourdough toast with some like cheese, and it's almost like a relish in a way, but it's just that tomato, and
it tastes cooked.
It's amazing.
It has the sweetness and the umami of cooked tomatoes with a decent amount of funky flavour going on, but also the aromatic qualities of fresh tomato, which you lose otherwise. And and that's another interesting thing, is that putting it on toast, if the toast is hot, what the heat then unlocks, that if it came straight at room temperature or from a fridge, it's why we drink wines or beers all at different temperatures, and they're very specific, because the flavours quite often might not even be that nice if drunk at the wrong temperature. And the same goes for fermented foods, that we can then really expand how we're enjoying them by just adjusting little subtle things, like pairing it with something, like having it on toast with cheese, or altering the temperature of it and seeing what that then releases from the food.
Could you turn it into like a gazpacho?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah. Or mix it with some fresh tomato again, or even, if you wanted to grill some cherry tomatoes to bring out the sweetness, let them cool, mix it together and then make a relish that you can dress things with.
It's amazing.
You know, like once you've got the thing, this is what I say to people: once you've got the thing, you just have fun, go wild with it. You know, there's no limitation.
What do you think is, like, with fermentation and looking at all of the different things that you grow or you work with that we grow here in the garden? If I was to say, hey, I want to create I want to dedicate a couple of beds for growing ingredients for fermentation, almost like a store cupboard staples for fermentation, but in a garden sense, what would be those staple crops that you think would serve as a really nice foundation for fermentation and versatility and flavour? And it can be like mainly focus on lacto ferments and kimchis and that stuff. So,
I would say
this is for my own use, by the way.
Yeah, I'd say anything that you're happy to have a bulky thing is always useful. It sounds really lame, but cabbages are amazing fermented. If it's specifically for fermentation, you could go with, purely based on flavours, what transforms so well, like tomatoes, like sugary things, like soft fruits. But really, knowing how you like to plant with your polycultures, I say the sheer diversity of stuff. Like fermentation really, I suppose, like in the same way that a meal, like if you're throwing your things into a salad, you want to have like, you know, grated carrot, you could have like slow roast beetroot, you can have all these different things going on, and they all kind of complement each other on the plate. They also complement one another in fermentation, and it's quite a nice way if you're having to come and just harvest little bits here and there and then plug gaps later on. All of those little bits can amount to a decent amount combined, which suits fermentation. And then you just freestyle it, you know, lacto fermentation, you freestyle it and you have that lovely infusion going on as well. But it could encourage you to plant, you know, some edible flowers. It could encourage you to put some herbs here and there as well, because everything can go in. There's no real best ingredient for it, but all ingredients suit it. So yeah, I'd say that's...
I want to pick up a really important point that you said there, and it almost comes back to what we were saying right at the start about the opportunity for people in the home.
Yeah.
And the fact that you said about doing it at any scale. So what if someone has a little jam jar? They could use that, and they don't need to feel like they need to have big 2-litre jars.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I think that's one of the beauties of it, is that you can set off these little things here and there. It can be scaled to any degree, anything you like.
For me, a lot of my fondest memories are food related, and I think in, I don't know, the top 100, because I have many, is when I tried, it was the dehydrated wild garlic kimchi.
Oh yeah,
that you
crisps.
did, the crisps.
Yeah.
What role do the wild foods for you play in terms of fermentation? What things do you want to explore with wild foods, and what are some of the wild food things? Because people love the idea of foraging, and I get it, but then when you combine foraging with fermentation, it's like niche.
Yeah. Well, a lot of forageable foods aren't, you know, commercially available because they're tricky. You know, they're either impossible to farm and grow at scale, or they require more processing to actually make them tasty or interesting or bioavailable, or in some cases not toxic. And but I'm fascinated by them because of their history and connection to place, in a way. You know, when we've spoken to Carwyn Graves about Rowan or mountain ash wine in Wales, and that's something that now I'm fascinated by, and spent couple of years working on it whenever they're available, of subjecting them to different processes to see how we can almost rediscover a lost practice here. So I do think, for me, wild foods in particular are that kind of connection back to a past when, we all lived off the land, when we were allowed to, before it all got divided up and walls were built. So that's where it lies for me. That's where the interest lies in foraged and wild foods, and fermentation is the lost history that's there and what we might rediscover.
And the other thing that I feel with the wild garlic kimchi is that, and do you know that, didn't you powder it into like a seasoning or something?
Yeah, I've done that as well. There's a lot of things you can subject ingredients to once they're fermented. And
also the flower stalks and the like flower buds and all these different things.
Yeah, making capers out of them.
Fermentation allows you to have, I think, a little bit more play with seasonality, because I think it's an opportunity to blend seasons together.
Oh yeah. And you sort of, well, not completely stop, but you slow down the clock on them.
Yeah.
So you end up carrying things through that are like flavours you'd normally, to the same degree, anyone that's foraged wild garlic, it's a distinctly springtime flavour. But then for us, fermented wild garlic is a distinctly summer and autumn time flavour, because that's when we've still got it lying around. And it is nice that flavours move through different periods and have a different vintage, if you will, as you go through the year when you're used to collecting and preserving and fermenting in this way.
One of the things with a lot of fermentation is about the conditions and climate and temperature. Is there a real lull of fermentation for you over winter, or have you found ways of still being able to ferment, or is fermentation itself quite a seasonal thing?
It is seasonal, but there's benefits to fermenting in winter. There are some practices like cider making that are traditionally done in the colder months, purely because slowing them down means they spend longer at every stage, which means you're getting more flavour, more microbial activity.
Is that because the temperature will age certain microbes, because certain microbes come in at certain temperatures?
Sort of, but also because with something like cider making or with lacto fermentation, that as they become stronger, the alcohol level or the acid level starts to knock certain strains of microbes into dormancy. So the slower you can make that, the more you have these more delicate microbes still able to work and still able to produce what they produce and what they contribute to it. It's why, you'd never need to inoculate a sauerkraut with a batch of mature sauerkraut, because you're instantly lowering the pH or raising the acidity to the point where you're muscling out these more delicate microbes and you lose what they contribute. So you can, and there's also a whole bunch of pathogens and nasty microbes that in the colder months get slowed right down as well, to the point where we can ferment more slowly and reap the benefits of the more delicate microbes without worry of some pathogen taking over. So a lot of the time because I've done it before where I've fermented something and I've been in a bit of a rush and I thought, I'll put the heating on in that room and keep it in there and bump it up a few degrees and let it rush through so I can have it quicker. And it's always such a thin taste. It's never the same as like when you've actually given the thing more time.
So could I do that with kimchi over winter then?
Yeah, definitely.
Because I remember once going on a kimchi course and they were very specific about room temperatures, and they're like, don't do it over winter and this kind of stuff. And it kind of was like,
Well, classic, the classic kimchi that everyone thinks of with kimchi is actually traditionally fermented in a fridge.
Right.
So
Wow, you need to have words to that person.
you keep it at room temperature, or we keep it ambient, which is anywhere between kind of, at the lowest range, 16 degrees Celsius, up to about 25. I mean, it will live up to about 30. That's the cut-off point. But in that range, you keep it there for a maximum of 2 days before moving it into a fridge, and that's just enough to make things start to sour. And then the fridge is where it then ages, and it really slowly, and it does continue to ferment. I've had kimchi in a fridge for 5 months or so, and when you take the lid off, you feel the pressure go in it. So it's still doing its thing. It's not just aging, it is fermenting at a lower temperature. So yeah, there's I don't know who told you that, but
yeah, I think I was like 15 or 16, and it was just like it was like a fermentation kimchi course, and we were doing it. And this is. She said we all did. This sounds so bad now. Oh dear.
Just don't name names. It's
no,
fine.
I'm not naming names, but I've just suddenly realised something as well. They got us to make kimchi in old chocolate boxes.
Oh, chocolate boxes.
Like plastic celebrations box.
Oh dear. Oh no.
Yeah.
That's quite bad.
Yeah.
That
was
for people who don't know, that's bad because high salt and high acid foods can leach unstable chemicals from plastics.
Yeah. I'm still alive for now.
Yeah, you're fine. You don't do it all the time.
It was only the one box, right?
Yeah.
Only one box of chocolates,
It's only the one box of plastic that you ate.
My gut microbiome sorted it out, no problem.
Yeah. Well, they have found a relative of Koji breaking down plastic. So
into what? Petrol? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. No. That's part of it when these things are discovered and they're like, oh, we found that it's breaking plastic down. Well, often breaking it down.
It's like liquid chemical.
Either into other harmful products, but yeah, they found it breaking it down.
Do you think that that with fermentation, that now that you've done this book, that you kind of are going to have a bit of a rest from fermentation? No? What do you want to achieve next with it?
I kind of want to go down. I've got multiple kind of like projects going on. One is purely on discovery, so in a way research. Part of that is intrinsically linked to what you grow and throw my way, which I love, and then just seeing how you can subject these things to different stuff. Part of it obviously is educating through my Substack, through online stuff, just trying to teach people that it's really easy and that it's safe and that it's incredibly tasty and beneficial. So that's another kind of part of the project, which is a never-ending thing. Then I've got the bug a little bit with Koji.
No, really?
I want to go follow that as deep as it goes and learn all of the traditional, everything I possibly can. Speak to people who are part of these families that have been working with it for 400 plus years and continue to figure out ways to adapt and apply and make it applicable to home kitchens and how to work with these things, because I find it fascinating. That one's kind of almost more purely for me, I think. I'm not sure how
Sounds like you need a trip to Japan.
Yeah, sounds like I need to learn Japanese.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's also the potential to also make products. I know we've spoken a bit about it in the past, and I've reached out to kind of food safety experts who, varying degrees of success. They're not massively clued up when it comes to fermentation. But yeah, later down the line, I would love to either be able to produce tasters for people to try and send them out, or even to run kind of occasional pop-ups here at the farm, do obviously masterclasses and teach people how to make it themselves, but also run actual kind of fire and fermentation meals where we invite people along and they get to try these things. So yeah, there's lots of little projects along the way.
Do you think you'll ever release and do that beer that's framed?
Oh,
Could that ever be a thing?
I don't know, maybe.
Chef Sam Black Brewery.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, everyone's got the recipe now because it's in the book.
Yeah. And you're on Instagram and you're doing a load of amazing things on Instagram, but you've moved to Substack as well.
Yeah.
How are you finding that? Just purely out of just as a new platform.
Yeah, I love it.
Why?
Because it is more considered. It's slower. It's a greater exchange. I find people leave really like in-depth, thought-provoking comments. It's not just a bunch of emojis or whatever else you get on Instagram. And I've always been a little kind of resistant when it comes to like short-form content and bite-sized things, and everything has to be here and now and sensationalized. And Substack
It's
really,
like turning up the heating for the kimchi to just speed it up.
quite,
And it's like really...
yeah. A good metaphor.
Yeah. But no, put it in the fridge and just let it,
Yeah. You can't rush good things. And that's what I love about Substack, is that the process of writing for Substack is it's nice to have dedicated time every week to sit down and be quiet and to think and to order those thoughts and to really flesh something out that is then going to be of worth to other people, you hope. So personally, it's a lovely process. And then the actual output and the platform and how people interact with it is also really nice. I get so many messages from people saying that they love to just to like curl up on the sofa and read the newsletter once a week, or that they might listen. I sometimes do readings and audio recordings of it. They like to listen to it whilst they cook dinner or whilst they knit or whatever else they're doing. And it's lovely to think that it feels like a much more nourishing, healthy relationship with content, the world of content that we're engaged in.
And it's turning into quite the resource for foodies.
Yeah, well, I realised that
with your masterclasses.
Yeah, I realised that I've actually surpassed a book word count recently on Substack. So that's now essentially another book's worth of just stuff and recipes and techniques, and there's more freedom on Substack. I can one week do a masterclass on a specific technique, another week talk more about a crop that we've grown and give updates from the farm and garden and stuff. Another week decide, that ferment I taught them how to make, I'm going to give them 5 recipes on how to use it now. So whereas the book very much has a dedicated promise that is then fulfilled and stuck to, something like Substack that's this growing beast that can go in different directions, feels more organic.
Yeah, I like, as a user perspective as well, Substack is so nice because you're not getting adverts bombarded, and you can really kind of curate the kind of things that you want to see.
Yeah.
And I think that, the way that I see it, that our next book project together, we just need to work out how we're going to do it, but we're going to serialize it on Substack and release, I'll release the garden side, you'll release the kitchen side.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be quite fun. I think that'll be a lot of fun. And the other thing, one thing I want to thank you for is the idea of how food, because I always used to say it's like food is a way to connect with people, or a thing of connection. But what I'm really excited about is I think people feel very disconnected and very hopeless, and that food is a vector of bringing that idea of connection and hope, but doing that around a table and sat down. And I think what we'll do in the not too distant future, we'll record another podcast episode where I want you to really go into that side of connection and the idea of the long table, the history of restaurant, and what restaurant actually means with restoring and restorative. And I just think that your perspective is very refreshing, and I think I want people to hear that.
Definitely.
But my final question, and before you head off, don't forget to pre-order. Well, order. You can buy it now at the Fermentation Kitchen.
So used to saying pre-order.
I am. And for my own thing, it's available. There'll be a link supplied.
But you can't have that copy because that one belongs to Hugh.
Yes, so you can sign it afterwards.
Yes.
But the final thing is, just touching off the subject of fermentation, is there any other kind of food or cooking technique that you're particularly interested in exploring or doing a deep dive into that isn't fermentation?
Fire. Yeah, I love fire. Is infinitely more scope for fun with fire than people realise. I think you think of just like a campfire and setting it off, but the types of wood that you use, whether you choose to burn off the bark first and get rid of the dirty smoke, whether you are smoking, cold smoking, hot smoking, whether you are cooking directly on the embers and infusing things that way. There's using different types of branch, using seaweed, using pine for the infusion, for the oils to extract the resin. There's absolutely, it's much like fermentation. It's just my nerdy mind going, oh, here's a niche, how can we make it more niche?
Yeah, that suits me.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like it goes hand in hand as a slow food thing with fermentation. I think that they're both complementary of one another in that way. And yeah, in fact, in the future, one of the things that I want to do when we are more set up for fire pit cooking here is to create sort of an outdoor kitchen where the ferments are aged alongside it, where the cycle of day and night and seasonality is what causes changes within them. And we can really create an incredible food experience that's so localized, where the produce is being grown here, the very microbes that make it possible is here, the wood is being sourced locally, and things are being aged and produced and heated and cooked all on one site. And we just see what happens when you're like, we're off grid. The sheer scope of what can be done here to feed a long table worth of people will be amazing. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Yeah, me too. I wish I could just fast forward time so I can be there right now.
I want that with the orchard as well. It's like, come on, let's have big trees already.
You should probably sing to them a bit more, Sam.
Oh, I don't know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.